how many times have you been on the other end of it, where you've had a parent come in and say, my child can read this book so quickly, they've whizzed through it. And you're thinking, yes, but what have they read? Do they understand it? So when you're asking them questions about the text and saying, oh, so what happened at this point in the story? You know, who's that character there? They don't know the characters, they don't know the setting, they don't know what's happened. And that's also quite an interesting
That's another common barrier, isn't it? Hi Jess.
Hi Jo.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me. I wanted to get us together because I really wanted to talk about our experience as teachers with regards to a specific area, early reading, learning to read. I was recently just thinking to myself, all of the years of teaching children to read in reception year 1, year 2, and then as a consultant working with schools, helping those schools with children, you do come across sort of common barriers that children seem to face when learning to read. Time and time again, you'll have children that seem to face the same humps in the road. And as teachers, of course, and me working with schools as well. As teachers, of course, you do find ways, strategies, top tips, if you like, with how to help children overcome those barriers. And I thought it would be really nice to get us together today to sort of talk about how we might have dealt with those problems that we face when teaching children to read.
Our bank of top tips.
Yeah. So I suppose the first one, I mean, there are several that are very common, but a really common one is children who are learning their phonics sounds beautifully every day in reception, learning a new sound, great. But it comes to blending a word.
Yes.
And they sort of go, you know, d, o, g, umbrella or something
completely random.
Totally out there. And you just think, wow,
how did we get that one?
So where do we go from here?
Absolutely. How did we get this sound coming out their mouth?
Exactly. Is that something that it sounds like you face that sort of barrier too?
Yes, it happens so often. And I think each year when you're, especially as being an early years teacher, you can be surprised when you're faced with these things. So you've got children coming in and you're like, right, they're confident, they know their sounds, we're going into blending, you're trying to assess them and work out what groups they're going to be in for phonics. Yeah. And then you get kind of, like you said, a bump in the road where they come out with umbrella instead of dog or whatever it might have been. And you're thinking, right, we need to unpick this a little bit. And that's where it gets quite interesting as teachers to kind of work out how can we support children's learning in a way that's tailored to them, especially when you've got a group of them that are all at different stages. I mean, it can be quite a challenge. So especially when I was in early years, I found it quite useful, especially when you're thinking about, you know, your continuous provision, the classroom setup, how you want each zone to look, having that phonics space, especially in the early years. I mean, it should go on really to Key Stage 1 as well. It drip feeds in, but having that phonics space set up in the right way to make it so that children can not just learn in discrete phonics sessions, but learn in their continuous provision, in their play. It reinforces the learning. Is that something you've come across?
I think so. I do think that it's practice, isn't it? You know, it's practice makes perfect. And for some children, they just seem to get it effortlessly blending and they just say, oh yeah, it's obviously dog. But for some children, it's just not that easy.
No.
And we all just need, you know, children don't fit into those little boxes, do they?
No.
And we don't all learn to read at the same sort of pace. And so it's up to the teachers to put in the extra time and practice. I do think quite often when I found that children have this particular problem, that is them tuning into the fact that words are made up of sounds. And that sometimes I think there's a disconnect between I'm learning these sounds every day and these letters, great, but not actually realising that that's what words are.
Yeah.
And it's just, I really feel like that sort of practice as well of just saying sounds in words all of the time, maybe like games. I'd quite often say to schools to play games like, what noise does a cat make? And the children will say meow meow.
Yes.
And you know that they've got that oral blending. So almost going back a step. Okay, they're not blending. Let's take away the pressure of reading at the same time and just practice the blending, like the oral practice of blending. You know, who can put your hands on your d and things like that. And just games, maybe.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's about kind of like lowering the pressure, lowering the risks at stake here for the children, because the last thing they need is to feel like they're getting it wrong, the pressure, the fact that we're thinking they've got it, but they're not. So we're trying to get them to perform in a certain way. And like you've just come up with, having those sort of simple games that can seamlessly kind of be woven into your, school narrative. You could do it for any age group, for any year. And children, don't realise that you're actually teaching them whilst you're doing these types of things. You could be doing a shopping list. You could do so many different ways. You could go on a treasure hunt at school, and you could come up with so many different ideas and say, right, we're going to do a visual hunt this time. We're going to go look out for something, and you could say so many different words to the children, as you said, decoded, see if they can blend them together. And if they do it with their peers as well, I find it really gives them the confidence, because having that mixed ability really can sometimes be a great way to model to other children. If there's one that's a little bit weaker and needs a bit of support, struggling, having that peer who might be stronger, modelling, giving them that opportunity to hear it, repeat it, try it again for me. And it's just those subtle things, and taking like the pressure off, because we want to give kids confidence, don't we? We want to build their confidence. And if we keep getting them to a point where they're feeling like, let's say they're trying to decode dog and they're saying umbrella.
Usually quite that extreme,
but it can happen, and it does happen. And I think kind of making them feel like, right, how can we as teachers put them in a good position to learn? And like you said, the low risk games are a really good one, where it doesn't feel like as much pressure. Having your environment set up from your displays and your continuous provision, that the toys that you've chosen to have out, having the visual cards, and then having like alphabetic letters to see if the children can match them. Even just matching them can really help kind of embed the learning. So it goes beyond from your teaching sessions on the carpet to, right, how can you kind of carry on the learning yourself in the classroom?
I think that's brilliant. And I think that that's a key point that you made about, if children, they very quickly start to realise if they can't do something, and it damages their sort of self-esteem, their confidence as well. And you just sort of think, if they're repeatedly trying to blend words and are coming up with a completely wrong word, then they're just clearly not understanding it. So we need to go back to okay, that's not working, let's go back. And I loved your idea as well of just weaving it in throughout the day, even if it's just, it's a bit cold outside, children, time to put on your coat before you go out to play. And just at any point. And I know that you're also keen to sort of find ways that parents can support, and that's quite an easy one for parents, isn't it?
It's so
time to go
easy.
to bed.
Exactly.
Have you brushed your teeth tonight?
Absolutely. I think parents can feel quite overwhelmed with phonics, especially if you're not from an education background. Hearing the word phonics can seem a little bit daunting. There's lots of different schemes, different schools do different things. Hearing the language, trigraph, digraph, if you're not using it, you're thinking, what the heck is this? Is it some science experiment? What is it? And you're thinking, your 4-year-old's using these words. I mean, that can be a bit mind-blowing. So kind of taking that fear away. When teachers do their introductions at the start of the year, having those meetings with parents, a phonics meeting, to take away the barriers for parents learning. Because if parents feel a barrier, then the kids are going to feel a barrier to learning too. So having the children see their parents reading at home, simple things like that can really support children to understand that actually it's not about a work time when you're at school reading. It's about having opportunities to see your parents reading. So it's a natural thing. It's a reading for pleasure thing. It's an exciting thing. It's exposing children to more words and more language. And like you've just said, not just the teacher saying, time to go to bed. Your parents saying it too. It's such a simple thing. But I think taking away the fear for parents is quite a big one to support their children, because if parents feel empowered, then that's going to cascade onto the children. I just think that's a kind of a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, definitely. So get the parents in at the beginning of the year.
Absolutely.
Teach them how to speak in sounds, how to do oral blending, make it a game. And then get children the practice without the pressure of reading at the same time. Because if you think about it, they've got a word in front of them. They have to look at the first letter, remember what sound that letter makes, hold it in their head whilst they move on to the next letter.
It's a lot.
Remember what that letter, and say that one, and hold on to that one, and move on to the third one. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
And if the blending isn't effortless, then you can see why it falls to pieces.
Definitely.
So lots of practice blending at home.
Definitely.
Training up the parents in the classroom as well.
And like you said, little low stakes games, simple ways that they can have their kind of playing it. They feel like they're playing with phonics, they're playing with words, they're playing with learning. It's something we did at school when a child really had a barrier to maybe one word, and you can't work out why. Sometimes it might just be dog, or it could be your red word, your tricky word, the word that the children can't decode and blend. We would write that word, so who, what, the, whatever it may be, and would stick it on their t-shirt, and they'd walk around school, and would tell the whole school and say, look, if you see this child with this sticker on, just say to them, oh, what's that sound? What's that sound? And then throughout the day, they might have about 15 different members of staff saying to them, what is that sound? And little Harry might say,
that's a brilliant idea.
The. And every time he's seeing, they're like, great. And they're really empowering him, making him feel brilliant. He's learning and he's getting it. And then, because he's had to repeat the learning, he's had extra exposure.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just such a simple way of doing it. Just so easy.
Yeah. And actually repetition and practice, it really does come down to that, I think, a lot. It's just doing it more, because not every child would learn to read at the same pace as every child. Some children just get blending. It's just obvious to them.
Definitely.
And then for others, it just takes longer. And I think our job as teachers is to make sure that whatever extra practice and time and patience that child needs, we're there to sort of make sure that they get it, to facilitate that. And I think that's a brilliant idea.
Completely.
Getting all the adults in the school to help that child really learn those key words. That's brilliant.
And it is about, as well, just not thinking about, if you're trying to get little Harry to learn the word, not to keep putting them on the carpet, not to keep teaching them phonics, the way you teach the group phonics. You might have to think a different way. And actually sometimes having a different adult to do that, by the different teachers in the school, or even your TA to take them out. Sometimes that can be a barrier. It might be a connection to the person teaching them.
Yeah,
so
true.
Having that connection with a different person, it might just knock something into place and give them that confidence.
Yeah. And actually I know plenty of children who have not made sort of steady progress in whole group phonics, but as soon as they get 5 minutes one-to-one with an adult, that's where the learning takes place.
Definitely.
And I think, when there's 30 children in the class, for some individuals in that class, it's really difficult to concentrate, or the pace is not quite right there for them.
Sensory overload.
And so if they just literally little enough, and 5 minutes a day with an adult, of a bit of top up, a little bit of blending practice, or whatever the barrier is.
Yeah.
And I think you can make massive amounts of difference.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, it's habits, it's micro habits, small little habits every day make huge differences. And it's not overlooking those little habits. So if it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 10 seconds by talking, saying, what's that word? It can just make such a big difference. So I don't think we should overlook habits.
No, definitely. That's great. So what about those children then who they can sound out and blend? Brilliant. They know all their sounds, they can blend. But you get a book in front of them and they're sounding out every single word. You know what I mean?
Yes,
the, at, cat, is, on, the, at, mat. And, it's excruciating.
It is. It's so painful,
I
isn't
think
it?
for you, for the child, probably for the parents
group,
as well. And
yeah.
you just think, okay, so this child can blend, but I can't stop. They can sound out and blend, but now I need to stop them sounding out and blending.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a familiar one, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really tricky as well, because you're trying to get them to you want them to sound it out, but also you want them to have the skill of sounding out in their head so that they can get that fluency.
Yeah.
And it's the fluency where they kind of need to have the focus on, and it's thinking of different strategies within the classroom and with the children where they can build on fluency and they can get faster with their blending, because we know they can decode, we know they can blend, but they need the fluency. So checking the books. Have we got the right book suitable for them?
Yeah.
Have we gone a step too far, thinking they're actually more able than what they are? Because are they understanding what they're reading? If it's that difficult to do that, I wouldn't be taking any of it in, would you?
No, exactly. I know, absolutely not. And I do think that it's really important to make sure children are reading at the right level. And I think there's a common misconception sometimes with children's reading books, which is if they're reading it fluently, it must be too easy for them.
Yeah.
And actually, children shouldn't find reading a book a chore. It should be a pleasure. The hard work should be in learning how to read the book. But once you get the book, then the child should be able to read it. You don't want it to be a painful experience for the child reading that book, limping their way through it. So if a child can read a book, maybe having to stop and sound out a couple of words on the page, that's probably about right. And we don't want it to be too hard. But I think for some children, I think sometimes the level is incorrect. I think that's really important. For some children, it's almost like it becomes a safety net or a habit that they just can't seem to stop themselves. And I don't know if it's a fear of getting it wrong. And so they think, well, at least if I sound out and blend, I know I'll get it right.
Yes.
Or I don't know if it's just some children, they think that's what reading is, or that's what their teacher wants. And they haven't learned that sounding out a word really is just a strategy to learning how to read that word. And once you've learned how to read that word, you don't need to sound it out anymore.
Absolutely, yes.
It's okay.
It's part of your working memory by then.
Yeah.
So it might be like you learnt through sight. So you go back through your reading and you don't need to decode dog because you know what it looks like. You know the shapes, yeah. And I think it's things like, if they're still having to do that, do we still need to go back even further and have more resources out where if it's a common word that they keep getting, that they're still sounding out and you're thinking, right, you know, CVC words, dog, cat, they should have this by now.
Yeah.
If they still need that support, do we need to help their memory, their visual memory, to just see the word and help them remember it by sight? Because we know they can decode, we know they can blend, but now we want to build on the fluency. So maybe more memory games in class to build that strength and work on that muscle.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think it's helping children to realise that they do know it instantly. You know, so many times I'll sit with a child and they'll sound out a word. Let's say they've just sounded out cat. And then I'll just say, you know, sweetheart, what does that word say? Just tell me what it says. Cat. So you know it says cat.
Yes.
So why? You do
Why do you
know
keep
it
sounding it
instantly.
out?
You
Yeah.
do know it is in your memory. You have learned to decode it. You do know that word. You don't need to keep on sounding it out. And it's almost like giving them permission sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think you're right as well. It's a really good point that you said about going back. And I think you need almost right from the beginning, as soon as a child has decoded a word a few times, I think you can say to them, you know this word now, don't you?
Absolutely.
Write down in the first weeks of reception, as soon as they've read a word a few times, you can sort of say, look, you don't need to sound that out anymore, because otherwise if you leave it till they get to year one, then they've had a whole year of sounding out everything.
It's a new learned behaviour, isn't it? And that's so much harder to unpick as a teacher, isn't it? To unpick those new learning habits. So you want to nip it in the bud early. And how many times have you been on the other end of it, where you've had a parent come in and say, my child can read this book so quickly, they've whizzed through it. And you're thinking, yes, but what have they read? Do they understand it? So when you're asking them questions about the text and saying, oh, so what happened at this point in the story? You know, who's that character there? They don't know the characters, they don't know the setting, they don't know what's happened. And that's also quite an interesting
That's another
one.
common barrier, isn't it? To
Yes.
reading. Children who can read any word.
Yes.
Not the foggiest idea what they've read.
Exactly.
And a lot of Key Stage 2 teachers, I think, had this gripe, you know, when children's decoding is so strong and they've passed their phonics screen check with flying colours.
Yes.
But they haven't attended to comprehension.
Yes, and Key Stage 2 teachers thinking, what the heck's going on here? You can't be saying they can do this when they don't understand what they're reading. And and that's such that shouldn't be overlooked either, because it's such an important part of the reading skill, is not just the ability to decode and blend and read fluently, but actually being able to understand the text. Because if you've got a maths question and it's a problem solving one, if it's asking you to do something where you have to add, minus, subtract, whatever it might be, you can read it, but you can't understand its meaning, you haven't really understood it, then you cannot solve that problem.
And actually I was in a school once where they had recently had an Ofsted inspection and a maths lesson had been graded poorly because they said that the child wasn't able to understand what they were reading. And so that's where reading is everything, isn't it? It's not just your phonics lesson or your
every topic,
every life,
every
subject.
Yes, that's it.
And so comprehension then, I mean, what can we do? And parents again as well, you know, what should we be doing? And again, I think what you've been saying earlier about going back to taking it back a step, I feel like we should be teaching it from the get-go, shouldn't we? It's not like, well, you've learned to read, now we're going to teach you to comprehend.
Absolutely.
So what can we sort of be doing then in terms of developing children's skills and comprehension alongside their learning to read words through phonics?
I think things like storytelling is so important, and being able, and when you're talking to the children, kind of to support, even though we are doing those discrete phonics sessions where we're decoding words, we're blending them, we're building on fluency, it's having that opportunity within the classroom to read stories and ask the children questions on what we've just read. Oh, what's going to happen next? Can we use your inference skills? So not overlooking either the power of a picture. I mean, pictures bring stories to life, especially for young children when they're trying to develop their imagination. And I think making sure we don't overlook the opportunity for teachers, teaching assistants, whoever, parents, whoever is working with that child, or even peer-to-peer questions. Let's give you an opportunity to talk to each other on the carpet.
So
don't you love what you say?
And it really helps with your cognitive process, you know, if you're actually talking it through with somebody.
Absolutely.
Well, I thought this, and what did you think? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it gives them the confidence.
Nice.
Yeah, and get you, and as a teacher, isn't it great when we say, right, talk partners now. It gives you a moment to think of your next question, your next strategy, and how you're going to guide the learning. But it actually, there's so much they get from being able to turn to their partner. It takes away the fear barrier, because if they feel a bit nervous talking to you as the teacher or the TA, then it gives them an opportunity to ask them questions. And I do think there's a lot of importance in being able to ask questions, and good questions, open questions sometimes, so children have the opportunity to infer, look at the picture, look at the text, or just think, did I remember that? Did I listen right? Does that word mean that? I'm not too sure what that meant. And those opportunities are just really important.
Yeah, so there's lots of kind of good top tips there all woven in.
Sorry, I got a bit carried away.
It's good, but I just kind of want to talk about them all because they're all so good. So definitely reading more to children, storytelling. The more stories they hear, the more stories they'll understand. And early children's literature, they very, very often, most books will follow a similar sort of story structure. It's helping children become familiar with those story structures that stories are sort of hooked onto, so that then they can understand the sort of, they can understand narrative structures, and then they can start to understand the details of each story and how it follows those. I think that's really important. So all that exposure to stories and storytelling. And pictures is a really good point, I think, because we always say that children should be able to read words without pictures. And I firmly believe that, because once they go into Key Stage 2 and beyond, the pictures will decrease. But it doesn't mean, what I think pictures are brilliant for is for early development of comprehension, as you said, because don't use the pictures to figure out what the words say. Use your phonics skills for that, but use the pictures to kind of help you tell the story. And especially with early reading, if you think about it, because children's learn to read books, they're sort of at their reading level. Quite often they're not very deep.
No,
do you know what I mean? It's
level,
very basic sort of words that they're reading.
Yes, sad.
So in order to bring it to life, in order to give it that sort of greater depth in comprehension, you kind of have to use the picture to tell half the story, don't you?
Definitely.
And I feel like that's a really, really important point as well, is use the pictures to help develop children's understanding of books, introduce them to those stories.
And using different words, like you said, when you're looking at the picture, and say if the text says Billy was feeling sad because his dog left, or whatever it might have been, if the teacher rephrases it and says, who's worried in this picture? Who's worried? And they have to then use their inference skills, because they've heard the word sad, they've heard the word worried. Hopefully they're making those connections and thinking all their similar meaning, to reinforce their ideas and opinions by looking at the picture and seeing like the facial expressions. Hopefully that will be supporting what the text is saying, which it should do, but then it will make them feel like, actually this person's feeling that way, and they can explain it a bit more. So it can give those, because children learn in different ways, right? As much as sometimes we want to pigeonhole and say it makes it easier for us as a teacher if everyone learnt the same way, having all those different strategies in place can make sure it's inclusive and everyone can have a go at learning.
I totally agree. And I really feel like your other point about getting the children to talk to each other, because of what you said, it's exactly right. If you just ask a comprehension question, hands up, then so many children won't want to contribute. It's putting themselves on the line, isn't it?
Definitely.
But if you give them a chance to talk about it, and then also when the children are talking, you can be listening to what they're saying, and you can sort of check that your teaching is going well by what they're saying, and then they may be more confident to contribute their thoughts. And I feel like getting the talk going around the stories is really important as well. And of course teaching children comprehension, which is something which I think is overlooked. So it's just because a child can read a book, it doesn't mean they know how to be a comprehending reader. And it's almost modelling it as a teacher. It's just sort of saying, when I look at this, I'm just thinking, I'm wondering how Bowser is feeling in this book. I wonder how this character is feeling in this book. I'm going to just think, so this is what's happened. If that were me, I'd be feeling like this. And just teaching children how to question as you read, how to read between the lines, and almost the things that we take for granted when we read a book. I mean, when we read a book, we're filling in the gaps all the time in our own ways. We all have different interpretations of the books that we read. And we take it for granted. I think for children, sometimes you have to teach them, hang on, this is strange. Why is the character behaving like this? It makes me think that maybe they're up to something. Start sort of really teaching children how to be a questioning reader, and obviously teaching as vocabulary is a massive thing. As we know. And
I think like you've just said, you hit the nail on the head. Those metacognitive strategies as a teacher to kind of narrate your thinking, to explain when you're reading a comprehension text or a story and you're unpicking it yourself, but doing it vocally, you're doing it out loud, and the class can just hear your thought process. there's so much power in that modelling, and we are at school, we can be the best models for the children. We're meant to be showing. Sometimes if we find something hard, if I come across a word that I don't know the answer to, because I don't know all the words, it's quite interesting for the class to see, right, so how is she going to solve that? What's she going to do about it? And then to try and actually show that on the spot, be like, well, actually, I don't know that. And to show that we don't know it all, that's okay.
Yeah.
It gives them the confidence.
Being the model.
Yeah, definitely. Be vulnerable. As a teacher, it's important to be vulnerable. It's important to show that actually we want to show you how to learn, but we're learning ourselves, and you're teaching us as much as we're teaching you.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on from this topic, I think we should talk about sort of children's vocabulary levels, which are, as we know, are diminishing year on year. Anecdotally, teachers are saying all the time they feel like children's vocabulary levels are poorer than the year before. And I know through, for example, the Oxford Language Report by Oxford University Press that they publish every year, they talk about children's vocabulary levels and the decline in those, which they are sort of calling the word gap. And of course, this is going to be a barrier to understanding, isn't it? So what can we do there with sort of vocabulary deficit?
I feel that I'm really passionate about the power of talking and oracy and having those opportunities. So like we're focusing on it at school, but I do think in order for a child to learn, it's not just about what the teachers can do, it's a community effort. You know, was it the saying, a whole village to raise one child, or something like that? You know, there is something in that. I totally agree with it, you know. And I think that as teachers, I think it's important to have those circle time discussions to expose children to new words, new language, new words of the day, new things that you're learning about, new topics. If you've got a topic that you're learning about and there's a particular word that's going to keep coming up within that topic, have it as a highlight, have it at forefront, send it home to, you can use platforms like Class Dojo, but using platforms to share the learning that you're doing in school with home, so parents feel they can have those conversations around the table, especially like dinner time. It's so easy. We know what it's like as parents and as teachers, you know, working, it's exhausting. When you get home, you know, it can be like, right, it's power on, food, bath, bed, beyond, you know, you want to get on to the next day. But actually just spending 15 minutes talking and your children hearing the language that you're using, hearing the words that you're exposing them to that you think nothing of, but they're like, oh, I didn't know what the word meant.
Being models again for good quality sort of language and vocabulary is really important. Obviously choosing, when you're reading stories to children, choosing ones that you know are going to include really lovely vocabulary. I mean, children love grown-up sounding words, and children love to hear them and say them. So getting children to really get their mouths around some lovely, delicious language in a storybook is great. And I guess the other thing is just direct instruction, teaching vocabulary. We're going to learn a new word today. And obviously, Mrs. Wordsmith, that's something that we really are passionate about, is teaching vocabulary and just saying, right, we have got, you know, there's lots of lovely words that these children just don't know. I'm going to be a great model for vocabulary. We're going to get the parents involved in that. We can read all these brilliant stories, but I still feel like it's worthwhile doing a word a day in the classroom, weaving that word in as much as you can through the week in your conversations.
And like we said earlier about micro habits, it's such a word a day. It is so simple to do because all you have to do is kind of expose them to that one word a day. It's achievable, it's manageable, it doesn't add to your workload as a teacher, because that's the big thing. I know it sounds like it's daft because it's only one word, but it does. Everything adds to your workload. No matter how many times you try to incorporate something new, it's about making it manageable and it's sustainable. So being able to do that is a great way to expose children to new learning, your staff to new learning. You know, it's important that you're all growing and learning together, and then you can use those words between you, which is
great. That's it. And using the words again, so not just this is the word we've learned and then we never hear it again. But like you say, using it out loud, using it with your classroom assistant, or using it throughout the week with the children. You know, whatever
use the word flabbergasted. It might not be something you usually use, but if you actually, I was flabbergasted today, children.
That was our word of the day.
It's just so simple to incorporate, isn't it? And it really does make you think as the teacher, actually, I'm going to try use and expanding your vocabulary, because then it will help enhance the children's as well.
And of course we're talking about reading comprehension, but you know, it's important for, isn't it, communication, writing, composition, everything. I think it's really important.
So it helps with expression as well when children are trying to express themselves. ourselves. We get a lot of like mental health is such a peak at the minute, especially in children and young boys. It's really important that they have the words and the language to express themselves, because they might not be feeling sad, even though they say sad. It's understanding actually what emotion are you feeling. Is it low? Is it depressed? Is it, has your confidence been knocked? And that's why that exposure to all these different words can be so important.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to understand how someone else is feeling and to be able to communicate how you're feeling is so important.
Yeah.
I feel like there is still many more barriers that we could keep on talking about, but maybe we'll just do a part 2.
Yes.
Barriers to reading part 2.
Absolutely.
What do you
I think we're going to have to. Keep going for hours.
But for now, I think that's it. Thanks, Jess. Thanks so much for talking to me. I've definitely picked up a few top tips.
Great.
So thank you very much.
No problem.